Brigitte rested her head against the cold window of the classroom as the last math lesson of the day dragged on. The numbers danced before her eyes. Formulas and fractions seemed to blend together in her mind into an incomprehensible jumble. When the bell finally rang, she felt her shoulders relax. She grabbed her bag, waved briefly at her friend Camille, and walked through the wide corridors of the college toward the exit. Outside, she took a deep breath. The air was fresh and full of promise. It was one of those typical Lyonnais afternoons, with a gentle breeze wafting the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee across the schoolyard. Brigitte walked to the rack where her bike stood, a light blue Velour her parents had given her last year. She ran her hand over the handlebars, placed her bag firmly in the basket, and fastened her helmet. The first few meters across the schoolyard felt stiff, her legs still heavy from the day. But as soon as she left the gate and turned onto the wide Avenue Jean Jaurès, she felt freer. The city unfolded before her like a painting. Lyon, with its two great rivers, the Rhône and the Saône, winding like blue ribbons through the city, was her home. She cycled along the sidewalk, where plane trees held their green leaves like a canopy above her head. The sun filtered through the foliage, playing with light and shadow on the asphalt. On her right were small bakeries, their windows full of croissants and pains au chocolat. The smell made her stomach rumble, but she kept cycling. At home, her mother would be waiting with a cup of tea. Brigitte crossed the wide Quai Claude Bernard and reached the banks of the Rhône. Here began her favorite part of the route, the bike paths along the river. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, and on the quays, people sat on benches, absorbed in books or talking with friends. Occasionally, she passed a group of students laughing and gesturing, or a father teaching his child to ride a bike. The city felt spacious and light here. Across the river, she saw the imposing buildings of the Presqu'île, the heart of Lyon, where the city buzzed with life. The Rue de la République ran like a wide artery through the center, full of shops, cafes, and people hurrying or strolling, enjoying the day. Brigitte loved this mix of old and new. The stately facades, the modern shops, the smell of fresh coffee and perfume drifting from open doors. She continued north, following the river. In the distance, she saw the Pont de la Guillotière, where colorful boats gently rocked at the quay. Swans and ducks floated on the water, undisturbed by the city's bustle. Sometimes, Brigitte would stop here to watch the reflection of the clouds in the water, but today she kept going. On her left was the Parc de la Tête d'Or, one of the largest city parks in Europe. She smelled the scent of grass and flowers, heard the soft rustling of leaves and the laughter of children rising from the park. She thought of the times she had picnicked here with her parents, or lain on the grass with her friends gazing at the sky. The city slowly changed character as she cycled on. The wide boulevards gave way to narrower streets, with old apartment buildings whose facades were adorned with wrought iron balconies full of flower boxes. Here, Brigitte lived with her parents on the 5th floor of an apartment building in the 6th arrondissement. The building was old, with a stairwell that smelled of floor wax and memories. She slowed down at the entrance, got off her bike, and looked back for a moment. The city lay behind her, but the hum of Lyon was everywhere. The soft rumble of trams, the clicking of heels on the pavement, the distant sound of an accordion player at the metro station. Brigitte smiled. Despite the tough day, she felt at home in this city that was never completely quiet. She dragged her bike inside, greeted the concierge who nodded kindly at her, and took the elevator upstairs. In the small apartment, it smelled of lentil soup and lavender. Her mother was in the kitchen. Her father was reading the newspaper at the table. "How was your day, chérie?" her mother asked. Brigitte shrugged. "Math was hard," she said softly. Her mother poured her a cup of tea and set a plate of madeleines on the table. "Tomorrow will be better," she smiled. After dinner, Brigitte retreated to her room. She looked out the window, over the rooftops of Lyon, where the setting sun bathed the city in gold and pink hues. The Basilica of Fourvière towered high above everything, like a guardian over the city. She felt small and big at the same time, part of something greater. She grabbed her diary, wrote a few lines about her day, and then lay down on her bed. Outside, she heard the soft murmur of the city, life going on even as she slowly let herself drift off to sleep. As her eyes closed, she thought of the forest from her dreams, of the smell of damp earth and the whisper of leaves in the wind. She knew that tonight she would go on an adventure again, far away from math and homework, deep into the magical forest where anything was possible. A very brief one-time interruption. Are you enjoying my stories? Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me and help this channel grow. And now, back to the story. The evening sun had now disappeared behind the rooftops of Lyon. In the small room on the fifth floor, Brigitte sat on her bed, her legs folded under her diary still open beside her. She stared at the ceiling, where the light from the street lamp slid through the curtains and painted soft patterns on the white paint. Outside, she heard the familiar sounds of the city, a distant siren, the soft hum of cars, the tapping of a rain shower that had begun cautiously on the windowsill. Brigitte sighed deeply. The day had been tough, her head full of mathematical formulas and sums that just wouldn't fit. But now, in the silence of her room, she felt the tension slowly leave her shoulders. She pulled her duvet up to her chin, let her head sink into the pillow, and closed her eyes. At first, she could still hear everything around her. The soft voices of her parents in the living room, the clinking of cups in the kitchen, the squeaking of the elevator in the hallway. But slowly, very slowly, the sounds faded, like voices underwater. Her breathing became deeper. Her thoughts began to drift. She tried to imagine being in a place where no one knew her, where there were no math lessons, no homework or tests. She pictured herself walking through a forest, a place she only knew from her dreams. She felt her body grow heavier, as if she were slowly sinking into the mattress, and at the same time her head felt lighter, her thoughts looser, like clouds drifting through the sky. It took a while before she could no longer tell the difference between being awake and asleep. Her room faded, the walls dissolved into the darkness. She could still faintly hear the tapping of the rain, but even that sound was slowly absorbed into another rhythm, a softer, deeper sound, like the beating of her own heart. She now saw herself, in her dream, standing at the edge of a forest. It was not an ordinary forest, she sensed that immediately. The air here was different, thicker, filled with a sweet scent of flowers and damp earth. The light was soft and bluish, as if the moon had just risen and everything was bathed in a silvery glow. The trees were tall and old, their trunks thick and covered with moss. Between the roots grew small, glowing mushrooms, lighting the path at her feet. Brigitte looked around, amazed at how real everything felt. She heard the gentle rustling of the leaves, the song of birds she had never heard before. Their voices sounded like whistling bells, clear and cheerful. The air was cool but not cold, and she felt a light breeze brush her cheeks. She carefully took a step forward, her feet leaving hardly any trace on the soft moss. With each step she took, the forest seemed to open up further for her. The trees gently bent their branches toward her, as if welcoming her. Tiny fireflies floated around her, their lights flickering like stars in the dark. Brigitte felt no fear, only wonder. She breathed in deeply and smelled the scents of the forest. Pine needles, damp leaves, a hint of honey, and something spicy she couldn't place. She heard the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the soft splashing of a brook somewhere further on. She walked on, her hand gliding along the bark of a tree that felt as soft as velvet. On the trunk grew flowers in colors she had never seen before. Deep blue, bright orange, soft lilac. Some flowers opened as she approached, releasing a fine mist that sparkled in the moonlight. After a while, she came to a clearing in the forest. The grass here was short and soft, like a carpet, and in the middle stood an old, crooked oak. The oak's branches were broad and heavy, and hung full of glowing fruits that pulsed gently, like the rhythm of a breath. Around the tree danced small animals, rabbits with silver fur, hedgehogs with golden spines, and a little fox that looked at her curiously. Brigitte crouched down and reached out her hand to the little fox. The animal cautiously came closer, sniffed her fingers, and then gently licked her hand. Its eyes were large and wise and seemed to want to tell her something. Brigitte smiled and stroked the fox's head. She felt a warm glow flow through her, as if the animal gave her courage and strength. Suddenly, she heard the sound of running water. She looked up and saw that at the edge of the clearing a narrow brook flowed. The water was clear as crystal and ran over smooth stones. In the water swam fish with scales like rainbows, and now and then one jumped up, leaving droplets hanging in the air like little pearls. Brigitte stood up and walked to the brook. She knelt down and dipped her hand in the cool water. It felt refreshing, and when she took her hand out, she saw that her fingers sparkled in the moonlight, as if they were covered with fine silver dust. She looked up at the sky above the forest. In her dream, the sky was not dark, but deep blue, studded with stars that were bigger and brighter than she had ever seen. Some stars seemed to move slowly, like little boats on a calm sea. She felt small beneath that endless sky, but at the same time safe and protected, as if the forest was watching over her. The little fox sat down beside her again and looked at her with its big eyes. "Welcome, Brigitte," it seemed to say without words. "You are here for a reason. This forest holds secrets for you, adventures waiting to be discovered." Brigitte felt her heart beat faster. She didn't know exactly why she was here, but she felt ready to find out. She stood up, looked once more at the old oak, and then slowly took the path that led between the trees, deeper into the magical forest. The fireflies danced around her, the little fox walked loyally at her side, and somewhere in the distance she heard the soft song of an owl. Brigitte felt light and free, as if she were floating rather than walking. The forest was full of promise, full of secrets waiting to be discovered. As she walked on, she noticed the light slowly changing. It became warmer, yellower, as if the sun was rising, even though it was the middle of the night. The trees became thinner, the path wider, and in the distance she saw something glistening among the leaves. Perhaps a lake or a hidden garden. Brigitte felt a thrill in her stomach, a sense that anything was possible in this forest. She knew her adventure had only just begun, and that behind every tree, under every stone, a new wonder awaited her. With the little fox at her side and the soft light of the fireflies around her, Brigitte took her first steps deeper into the magical forest, ready to discover what this dream had to offer her. Brigitte walked on, her feet soft on the moss-covered path, while the little fox silently trotted beside her. The trees grew taller and denser, their branches forming a green canopy above where the stars still just twinkled. The air was now cooler, and the sounds of the forest changed. The cheerful chirping of birds gave way to the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl. The path wound between the trees, sometimes so narrow that Brigitte had to lift her arms to avoid catching on the ferns and shrubs. The scent of the forest became more intense. Wet wood, earth, a hint of pine resin. Now and then, a rabbit darted away between the roots, or she saw the eyes of a deer light up in the glow of the fireflies. The little fox walked ever more confidently ahead of her, its tail up, ears pricked. Brigitte followed him, trusting his instinct. But as they went deeper into the forest, it grew darker. The moon disappeared behind a cloud and the path became harder to distinguish. The shadows between the trees grew longer, deeper, and the sounds of the forest now seemed to whisper rather than sing. Brigitte felt a slight unease rising. Her heart beat faster. She looked around, but everything looked the same. Trees, shadows, the soft glow of fireflies that now seemed farther away. "Little fox?" she whispered, her voice a little shaky. The little fox stopped and turned to her. Its eyes shone warmly in the dark. "Don't be afraid, Brigitte," it seemed to say with its look. It came closer, nudged its head reassuringly against her hand. She felt the soft fur and relaxed a little. But now the little fox looked more alert as well. "It's getting night, Brigitte," it suddenly said. And to her amazement, she heard its voice in her head, clear and friendly. "We need to find a place to rest. At night, the forest is different. The old trees whisper, and not everything you hear is what it seems." Brigitte nodded. She still felt a bit tense, but the idea that the little fox was with her reassured her. Together they walked on, more slowly now, their eyes searching for a safe place. Suddenly, through the trees, Brigitte saw a faint light. It was not moonlight, nor fireflies, but a warm orange glow that seemed to come from the heart of the forest. She stopped and pointed. "Look, there! Light!" The little fox pricked up his ears. "Come," he said. "Let's go there. Maybe we'll find a place to rest." They walked carefully toward the light. The path widened, the trees parted, and the soft moss gave way to a clearing. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood a small cottage. It looked as if it had come straight out of a fairy tale. Walls of wood, a roof of moss and leaves, windows behind which the warm light shone. A thin plume of smoke curled up from the chimney. Brigitte felt her heart beat faster, but now from curiosity. The cottage radiated something familiar, something safe. The little fox walked ahead of her, but suddenly stopped at the edge of the clearing. He looked at her, his eyes full of wisdom and a little sadness. "Here I must leave you, Brigitte," he said softly. "This part of the adventure is for you alone." Before she could say anything, the little fox turned and disappeared among the trees, his tail still visible for a moment in the moonlight. Brigitte swallowed, felt alone for a moment, but then bravely took a step forward. She walked to the cottage, her feet making hardly a sound on the soft grass. She knocked gently on the door, but it swung open by itself, as if invited by an invisible hand. Inside it was warm and light. The walls were lined with bookshelves, candles stood everywhere, and there was a scent of herbs and freshly baked bread. In the middle of the room stood a large wooden table, and on a chair at the head of the table sat a gigantic rabbit. The animal was at least as big as an adult human, wore neat trousers with suspenders, a striped shirt, and a small, elegant hat perched at an angle on his head. His fur was snow white, and his eyes were large and friendly, but also a little sad. The rabbit looked up as Brigitte entered. His whiskers trembled, and he pointed with a large paw to the chair opposite him. "Come in, girl," he spoke with a deep, warm voice. "Sit down, please." Brigitte hesitated for a moment, but the rabbit's voice sounded so friendly that she obeyed. She pulled the chair back and sat down, her feet dangling above the floor. The rabbit looked at her attentively, his ears moving slightly. "Well," said the rabbit, "finally a visitor. I have been alone for so long, but I am delighted that finally someone has come to visit me." Brigitte looked at the rabbit in wonder. She had never experienced anything like this. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "And why are you so big?" The rabbit smiled, his teeth gleaming in the candlelight. "Ah, that is a long story," he sighed. "I am an animal from the old world. There, all the animals were bigger, stronger, and if I'm honest, a bit wiser than now." Brigitte frowned. "The old world?" she repeated. "What is that? And how come you are here in this forest?" The rabbit folded his large paws on the table and looked at her seriously. "The old world is a place you can't find on a map," he began. "It is a world that exists alongside yours, a world of dreams, memories, and forgotten thoughts. When people go to sleep, they can sometimes make contact with the old world. It is a wondrous place where everything is possible and nothing is impossible." Brigitte listened breathlessly. "So, this forest, this place, is the old world?" The rabbit nodded. "Exactly. Your dreams have brought you here. Different rules apply here. Here you can fly if you want, talk to animals, and even make time stand still. But it is also a place where you must be careful. Not everything is what it seems, and sometimes you can get lost in your own thoughts." Brigitte looked around. Everything felt so real. The warmth of the fire, the scent of herbs, the gentle creaking of the wood. "And you? Have you always been alone here?" The rabbit nodded slowly. "For a very long time. Occasionally someone comes by, a dreamer like you. But most people forget their dreams as soon as they wake up. And then I disappear again into the shadows of their memory." Brigitte felt a pang of pity. That must be lonely. The rabbit smiled faintly. It's not always easy, but I've learned to keep myself busy. I read a lot, bake bread, and sometimes talk to the birds outside. But now that you are here, I feel a little alive again. Tell me, Brigitte, how did you get here? Brigitte told him about her day, about the math lessons, her bike ride through Lyon, her parents, and how she had fallen asleep wishing to be somewhere else. The rabbit listened attentively, his large ears pricked, occasionally nodding or asking a question. When she finished, the rabbit said, "You have a good heart, Brigitte, and you have a gift, the gift to dream, to travel between worlds. That is something very special. Not everyone can do that." Brigitte felt proud, but also a bit confused. "What should I do now?" she asked. "Should I go home?" The rabbit shook his head. "Not yet. The night is still young, and there are many more secrets to discover in this forest. But first you must rest. Tomorrow, when it is morning in the old world, I will show you something special." Brigitte felt her eyes grow heavy. The warmth of the cottage, the gentle voice of the rabbit, and the reassuring thought that she was not alone made her sleepy. The rabbit stood up, took a blanket, and draped it over her shoulders. "Rest now, Brigitte," he said softly. "Here you are safe. Tomorrow the adventure truly begins." Brigitte closed her eyes, listened to the gentle tapping of the rain on the roof and the soft whisper of the forest outside. She felt sheltered, as if she were wrapped in a cocoon of warmth and light. The last thing she heard before she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep was the rabbit's voice. "Welcome to the old world, Brigitte. Here, everything is possible." Brigitte woke up slowly. It felt as if she was rising up from a deep, dreamless sleep, like a bubble slowly ascending through dark water. At first, she couldn't quite feel her body, only a chill tugging at her skin and a strange silence enveloping her. When she opened her eyes, she saw nothing but darkness. No soft glow of the fireplace, no friendly eyes of the rabbit, not even the outlines of the cottage where she had fallen asleep. She was lying on her side, on something hard and cold. She felt around with her hand, her fingers gliding over wet leaves and a few sharp stones. Brigitte swallowed and sat up. Her breath came out in little clouds. It was cold, colder than she had ever felt in a dream. She squinted and waited for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. Slowly, vague shapes began to appear. She saw that she was lying on an unpaved path, surrounded by shadows that might have been trees, or perhaps something else. It was dead quiet, so silent that she could hear her own heart pounding in her chest. She felt small and alone in this endless night. Next to her, half hidden under a pile of leaves, she saw a lamp. It was an old metal lantern with a thick candle inside. She picked it up, her fingers trembling a bit from the cold. With some effort, she found a box of matches in her jacket pocket. Strange because she hadn't had that at home, but in dreams, nothing is impossible. She struck a match and lit the candle. A warm, flickering glow filled the small space around her. The light didn't reach far, but it was enough to reassure her. Brigitte stood up, brushed the leaves from her clothes, and looked around. The mist hung low over the path like a thin veil that made everything even more mysterious. She could just see enough to know that the path wound its way between the trees. She didn't know where it led, but it felt like the only option. She began to walk, her footsteps muffled on the wet earth. The silence was almost tangible. No birds sang, no wind rustled through the leaves. Only the soft ticking of candle wax dripping in the lamp and the rhythm of her breathing accompanied her. Now and then she stopped, listened, but heard nothing but her own presence. Suddenly, in the distance, she heard something. It was a short, soft growl. Not loud, not threatening, but strange enough to make her freeze. Brigitte held up the lamp, but the light didn't reach far enough to make anything out. She felt her heart beat faster. What was that? An animal? Someone else? She didn't know, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She walked on cautiously, her eyes scanning the darkness. After a few minutes, she came to a place where the path was broken. On the ground lay a thick, broken branch, as if something heavy had passed over it. Brigitte crouched down, touched the bark. It still felt fresh, The inside was moist. She looked around but saw nothing but mist and shadows. She stood up and walked on, her lamp in one hand, the other hand feeling along the trees. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, mixed with something else. Something warm, something that made her stomach growl. She sniffed deeply and recognized it instantly. Roasted meat, onions, maybe even a bit of garlic. Her mouth watered. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. The path became fainter, almost disappearing beneath her feet, but the smell led her on. She stepped off the path, between the trees, her shoes making soft prints in the moss. The mist grew thicker. The light from her lamp seemed to choke in the gray. But somewhere ahead, she now saw an orange glow, the dancing light of a fire. She crept closer, her heart pounding in her throat. Between two thick tree trunks, she saw a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing burned a fire, the flames licking at a black, sooty pot hanging above the fire. It smelled delicious. The scent of meat and onions was now overwhelming. Brigitte looked around but saw no one. No animals, no people, only the fire and the pot. She hesitated. Her mother had always taught her not to accept food from strangers, but this was different. She was alone, cold, and hungry, and the fire looked inviting. She set her lamp down on a fallen log and walked to the fire. The warmth was a relief. Her fingers tingled as she stretched her hands toward the flames. Brigitte looked around, her eyes scanning the shadows. "Hello," she called softly. Her voice sounded strange in the silence, small and uncertain. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. Only the crackling of the fire and the gentle bubbling of the soup in the pot. She waited, listened, but heard nothing but her own breathing. Carefully, she lifted the lid from the pot. A cloud of fragrant steam rose up, fogging her glasses. She looked into the pot and saw a thick, hearty soup, full of chunks of meat, onion rings, and carrot. It looked delicious, homely, as if someone had made it with love. She looked around once more. "I'm here alone," she whispered to herself, "and I have to eat something." She picked up a wooden spoon that lay next to the fire. Strangely enough, it was just her size, and stirred the soup. She blew on a spoonful and tasted it carefully. The taste was rich and warm, exactly what she needed. The soup filled her stomach and gave her new energy. She felt the cold leave her body, her hands warmed up again. As she ate, she kept looking around. It remained quiet, but she felt less afraid. The fire, the soup, the light from her lamp. It made her feel not entirely alone. When she had eaten enough, she put the spoon back and sat down on the log. She gazed into the fire, letting her thoughts drift. Who had made this soup? Had the rabbit from the cottage perhaps been here? Or was there someone else in the forest? Someone who might be watching her? She thought back to her conversation with the rabbit. "In the old world, anything is possible," he had said, "but not everything is what it seems." She felt a bit uneasy again. What if she was lost? What if she could never return to her own world? But as she sat there, she felt something change. The mist slowly lifted, the fire burned brighter, and in the distance she again heard a sound. A soft footstep, the crack of a twig. Brigitte jumped up, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her lamp and held it up, the light trembling in her hand. "Who's there?" she called, her voice a bit firmer now. She listened intently, her eyes scanning the darkness. There was no answer, but she had the feeling she was no longer alone. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the soup still in her belly. "I'm not afraid," she whispered to herself. "This is my dream, my adventure." She looked at the fire, at the pot, at the path leading further into the forest. Slowly, determined, she picked up her lamp and walked into the darkness, ready to discover who or what awaited her in this wondrous, shadowy world. Brigitte lingered by the fire for a moment, the empty spoon in her hand, her eyes fixed on the darkness between the trees. The crackling of the fire was now the only sound keeping her company. But somewhere farther off in the forest, she heard something again. A soft, scraping sound, followed by a short, low growl. Her heart skipped a beat. She put down her empty spoon, gripped her lamp tightly, and decided to investigate. Cautiously, she walked into the darkness, her feet muffled on the damp moss. The light from her lamp was weak, barely reaching more than a few meters. The mist drifted lazily between the trunks, making everything around her look hazy and unreal. Brigitte felt her breathing speed up, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a large black shadow appeared between the trees. Brigitte recoiled and held up her lamp. There, on a fallen tree trunk, sat a huge raven. Its feathers were deep black, shining like wet ink in the glow of the lamp. But the most striking thing was its clothing. The raven wore a dark gray vest with silver buttons, a checkered scarf around its neck, and a tall, slightly crooked hat on its head. Its beady eyes shone brightly and its beak was sharp and powerful. Brigitte swallowed and tried to find her voice. Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft but trembling. The raven slowly turned its head and looked at her piercingly. Its voice was shrill and rasping, like chalk scraping on a board. "Who I am? That doesn't matter, girl. What matters is that I am hungry." His eyes narrowed to slits. "And I smell that my food is gone. Did you eat my food?" Brigitte felt her cheeks grow warm. She looked at her shoes, at the lamp in her hand, and back at the raven. I didn't know it was yours," she stammered. "I was cold and hungry, and there was no one." The raven spread its wings, which seemed even larger and more menacing in the dim light. "No one? No one but me, who is always hungry in this endless night." He jumped off the tree trunk, his sharp claws making a scraping sound on the wood. With long strides, he walked to the fire, his scarf trailing behind him. He bent over the pot, sniffed deeply, and then looked at Brigitte with an angry glare. "There's almost nothing left," he croaked. "Did you eat this?" He stuck his beak into the pot and pulled out a few last pieces of meat and onion, which he greedily devoured. But it was clearly too little for such a large a creature. Brigitte felt her heart pounding in her throat. She wanted to apologize, but her voice caught. The raven turned to her abruptly, his eyes fierce and angry. "Did you eat this?" he cawed. "You did this, didn't you?" She felt smaller than ever, her hands trembling. She knew lying was pointless. "Yes," she whispered. "I was hungry. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was yours." The raven struck the ground with his wing. The fire flared up in the gust. "You're sorry? You're sorry? You stole my food, girl." His voice echoed between the trees and seemed to wake the whole forest. Brigitte shrank back, her back against a tree. The raven came threateningly closer, his beak dangerously close to her face. Brigitte felt tears sting behind her eyes but forced herself not to look away. I really was hungry. I'm lost. I didn't know what else to do." The raven stared at her for a long, icy second. His eyes were dark as night, but somewhere deep inside, Brigitte thought she saw a glimmer of something else. Sadness, perhaps, or loneliness. But that quickly disappeared, overshadowed by his anger. He turned abruptly and cawed loudly, his wings trembling with frustration. "Always the same in this world," he grumbled. "Always taking, never giving. Always strangers who think everything belongs to them." Brigitte stood motionless, her breathing fast and shallow. She didn't know what to do, what to say. The raven turned back to her, his beak just a few centimeters from her face. "You made a mistake, girl," he hissed, "and mistakes have consequences in the old world." The fire slowly died out. The mist crept closer, and Brigitte felt the cold return to her bones. She knew this was just the beginning of her troubles. Brigitte stood frozen before the large, angry raven. The fire behind her was almost out, the mist crept closer, and the night felt heavier than ever. The raven, with his shiny black feathers, his tall hat, and the scarf around his neck loomed menacingly above her. His beady eyes sparkled with rage. "You ate my food," he croaked again, his voice sharp as a knife. "You little thief!" Brigitte felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say something, but her voice failed. The raven took a threatening step forward. His wings spread, so he looked even larger. In a reflex, Brigitte turned and ran. She grabbed her lantern, felt the warm metal in her trembling hand, and ran into the dark forest, away from the fire, away from the raven. Branches whipped across her face. Her feet slipped on wet leaves. Behind her, she heard the raven screech, his voice echoing between the trees. "You can't hide from me anywhere in this old world." Brigitte ran, her breath coming fast and her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look where she was going, just away, further and further into the unknown. The mist grew thicker, the light from her lantern flickered and cast jagged shadows on the trunks around her. She heard her own footsteps, the pounding of her heart, and now and then the terrifying screech of the raven in the distance. Suddenly she heard rustling to her right in the bushes. She startled, almost stumbled, and paused for a moment, holding her lantern up. Out of the darkness the raven appeared again, now even larger and more menacing than before. He landed in the middle of the path before her, his wings spread, his eyes blood-red in the glow of her lamp. "Maybe I should eat you if you ate my food," he screeched, his beak dangerously close to her face. "That would be fair, wouldn't it?" Brigitte shrank back, her back against a tree. She felt smaller than ever, her legs trembling. "No, please," she stammered. "I'm really sorry. I didn't know it was your food. I was so hungry, and I was alone and scared." The raven came closer, his beak just a few centimeters from her face. "Everyone here is alone and scared," he croaked. "That doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours." Brigitte felt tears prick behind her eyes. I don't even know how I got here," she cried desperately. "I was in a cottage with a big rabbit. I was tired and scared, and he was kind to me. He gave me a blanket and said I was safe. When I woke up, everything was dark and cold, and I found the soup. I thought maybe it was the rabbits, or just for anyone who was hungry." The raven tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "A big rabbit, you say?" His voice now sounded less angry, more inquisitive. "With a little hat and trousers, white fur, long ears?" Brigitte nodded vigorously, relieved that the raven seemed to be listening. "Yes. He wore a small hat, neat trousers with suspenders, and he was very kind. He said he came from the old world and that he was often alone. He told me that sometimes people make contact with this world in their sleep, and that anything is possible here." The raven snorted, his wings dropping slightly. "That sounds like Bartholomeus," he muttered. "Always too friendly to strangers. He lets everyone in, even those who don't know what they're doing." Brigitte felt her breathing calm down. "He was kind to me. I didn't know I was doing something wrong." The raven stared at her in silence for a long time. His eyes seemed to pierce her, as if he wanted to read her thoughts. Brigitte felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she stood her ground, gripping her lantern tightly. "I'm lost here," she said softly. "I don't know how to get back. I have no one here except the rabbit, and now you." The raven kept looking at her. "And yet you take what isn't yours," he said, his voice now less sharp but still stern. "In the old world, everything has a price, girl. Nothing is just for everyone, not even kindness." Brigitte nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm really sorry. If I had known, I wouldn't have done it." The raven struck the ground with his wing, the sound like thunder in the silence of the forest. "Sorry is easy," he said. "Making amends is harder." "What are you going to do to make it right?" Brigitte thought. She had no food, no money, no idea how this world worked. I don't know," she whispered. "What can I do?" The raven regarded her thoughtfully for a moment. "Maybe there's something you can do," he said slowly. "But you'll have to listen, and you'll have to learn. The old world isn't made for people like you. But sometimes it needs someone who dares to dream." Brigitte felt a spark of hope. "I want to make it right, really. Tell me what I must do." The raven turned, folding his wings on his back. "Follow me," he said curtly. "But be warned. If you take what isn't yours again, I'll find you. And then I'll be less forgiving. Brigitte swallowed, nodded, and carefully followed the raven onto the dark path. She still felt afraid, but also determined. She wanted to show that she understood her mistake, that she was willing to do her best to make it right. As she walked after the raven, she thought of Bartholomeus's cottage, of the warmth and safety she had felt there. She wondered if she would ever be able to return to that feeling, or if the old world would always keep testing her. The raven walked in silence ahead of her, his feet making hardly a sound on the wet moss. Occasionally, he looked over his shoulder to see if Brigitte was following. She held her lantern high, the light flickering and casting long shadows on the path. After a while, they came to a clearing in the forest. In the middle stood an old, weathered tree with thick roots sticking out of the ground like arms. The raven jumped onto one of the roots and looked at Brigitte sternly. "Here your task begins," he said. "Listen carefully. In this tree lives an old spirit, the guardian of the forest. He hasn't awakened in centuries, but maybe you can reach him. If you wake him and ask him for forgiveness for what you've done, he might be merciful. But be careful. The spirit doesn't like lies or half-truths. You must be honest, or he won't help you." Brigitte looked at the tree. It was enormous, its trunk wide and covered with thick layers of moss and ivy. In the dim light, it looked as if a face was carved into the bark, with deep eyes and a stern mouth. She felt her heart pounding. "And if he doesn't forgive me?" she asked softly. The raven shrugged. "Then you'll have to learn to live with the consequences, but you have no choice. This is the only way to make your mistake right." Brigitte nodded, took a deep breath, and walked to the tree. She placed her hand on the rough bark, feeling the cold, damp surface beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on her remorse, her desire to make amends. "Guardian of the forest," she whispered, "I am here to ask for forgiveness. I took something that wasn't mine. I was scared, alone, and hungry. I'm sorry. Can you help me make it right?" Nothing happened for a moment. The wind rustled softly through the leaves. The mist moved slowly over the ground. But then Brigitte felt a vibration under her hand, as if the tree was slowly coming to life. The bark seemed to move, the lines forming into a face with deep, wise eyes. "Who asks for forgiveness in my forest?" a deep, echoing voice sounded. Brigitte swallowed, her voice trembling. "I am Brigitte. I ended up here by accident. I ate soup that wasn't mine. I didn't know it belonged to the raven. I'm truly sorry." The eyes in the tree looked at her searchingly. "Honesty is rare in this world," the spirit said slowly. "But regret alone is not enough. Are you willing to learn, to give, instead of take?" Brigitte nodded resolutely. "Yes, I want to learn. I want to make it right." The spirit was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I will give you one chance. Listen to the raven, learn from him. And remember, in the old world, nothing is what it seems. Only those who dare to dream with an open heart find the way home." The voice faded. The tree became still again. Brigitte felt a warm glow in her chest, a spark of hope. She turned to the raven, who regarded her with a tilted head. "You're lucky, girl," he said. "The guardian doesn't forgive easily." Brigitte smiled uncertainly. "Thank you. Thank you." The raven spread his wings and nodded. "Come, your adventure isn't over yet. There's still much to learn in this old world." Together they disappeared into the darkness of the forest, the light of Brigitte's lantern like a small star in the night, on their way to new secrets and challenges. The raven and Brigitte walked together along the winding path through the dark forest. The light from Brigitte's lantern swayed back and forth, making the shadows around them seem to dance. The mist slowly lifted, and the silence was broken only by the soft scratching of the raven's claws on the wet moss and the gentle tapping of the lantern against Brigitte's coat. Slowly, the raven began to speak, his voice now less sharp, more imbued with a certain wisdom. "Brigitte," he began, "you made a mistake today. You took what wasn't yours. But mistakes are not the end of a story. They are the beginning of learning. Brigitte looked up at him shyly. I know. I'm really sorry. I never thought I would hurt someone by just taking something. The raven nodded slowly, his beady eyes glinting in the dim light. Respect, Brigitte. That is what the old world wants to teach you. Respect for others, for their property, their feelings, their boundaries. In your world, people sometimes forget that. But here the consequences are felt immediately. Brigitte felt her cheeks flush with shame. I was only thinking of myself, of my hunger and my fear. That's human, said the raven, but it's also human to learn, to grow. The old world is a mirror, Brigitte. Everything you do comes back, sometimes faster than you'd like. Showing respect is not just being polite, it's understanding that you are part of something greater, that your actions affect the world around you. They walked on, and Brigitte felt the raven's words echoing in her mind. She thought of the rabbit, the soup, the raven himself. She felt small, but also determined to make things right. After a while, the raven stopped. He turned to her, his demeanor now softer than before. Brigitte, do you know why you're stuck here? Brigitte shook her head. No, I thought it was a dream, but it feels so real. I don't know how to get out. The raven looked at her intently. Your subconscious is deeply anchored in this world. You are dreaming, Brigitte, but your gift is special. You can open a portal in your mind to this old world. Not everyone can do that. This is a world much older than yours, another dimension. But now you've become stuck here because your subconscious has lost the way back. Brigitte furrowed her brow, trying to understand. So, I'm in a dream, but it's more than that? It's a real place, a real world. The raven nodded. For you, yes. And you're not the first. Sometimes dreamers get lost. They lose contact with their own world because they feel too much here, want too much, or understand too little. Only by learning, by growing, can you find the way home again. Brigitte looked at her hands, at the light from the lantern playing over her fingers. But how? How do I find my subconscious again? The raven spread his wings. His voice became softer, almost kind. You have to learn to steer this dream. You must understand that you have the power to shape, to change this world. But that can only happen if you do it with respect, with attention. Not out of fear or selfishness, but out of love and wisdom. Brigitte felt a slight tremor go through her. So, I have to try to change it. Here? Now? Try it, said the raven. Close your eyes. Concentrate on a place where you felt safe and happy. Imagine you are there. Not just in your thoughts, but with your whole being. Feel it, smell it, hear it. Let it become reality. Brigitte nodded slowly. She stood still, set her lantern on the ground, and closed her eyes. She thought of her bedroom in Lyon, the soft bed, the rustling of the city beneath her window, the scent of lavender on her pillow. She concentrated, trying to picture everything as vividly as possible. At first, nothing happened. She only heard her own breathing, felt the cold of the forest. But slowly, very slowly, the air around her seemed to change. The smell of damp earth gave way to the soft scent of lavender. The tapping of the lantern became the tapping of rain on her window. She felt the mattress beneath her back, the comforter over her shoulders. But when she opened her eyes, everything was different from what she had imagined. Instead of her familiar room in Lyon, she stood in a room that looked like her bedroom, but everything was enlarged and distorted. The bed was enormous. The blankets rolled like a sea. The walls were covered with moving shadows, as if the trees from the forest had crept inside. The window was there, but outside she saw no city, no light, only an endless starry sky. Brigitte gasped and looked around. This isn't my room, she whispered. The raven was suddenly at the foot of the gigantic bed, his eyes full of understanding. You tried, Brigitte, but you're not there yet. Your subconscious is still too restless, too full of fear and regret. You must learn to let go, to trust. Brigitte felt despair rising. But how? What if I never get out of here? The raven spread his wings and flew to her, landing gently on her shoulder. Listen to me, Brigitte. You are not alone. You have made friends in this world. The rabbit, myself, maybe others you will meet. Ask for help. Trust your feelings. And above all, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every attempt brings you closer to home. Brigitte nodded, wiped a tear from her cheek. She looked at the window, at the stars that slowly began to spin like a whirlpool of light. She felt dizzy, as if the world beneath her feet was starting to shift. Suddenly, the room began to fade. The walls dissolved into mist, the bed became moss and leaves again, the window disappeared into nothingness. Brigitte felt herself falling through an endless void, while the raven's voice still echoed in her ears. Keep trying, Brigitte. You can do it. She closed her eyes, concentrated again on her home, on her parents, on the feeling of safety. But this time, something else surfaced. She saw the rabbit's cottage, the fires in the forest, the smell of soup. She felt the warmth of friendship, the sorrow of regret, the power of forgiveness. Slowly, very slowly, the world around her began to take shape again. She was back in the forest, but now it was lighter. The mist had disappeared, and the sky was clear. The trees stood farther apart. Flowers grew in all the colors of the rainbow. It felt like a place between dream and reality, a place where anything was possible. The raven stood beside her, his demeanor now friendly and proud. You see, Brigitte, you're starting to understand. Your dreams are powerful, but they are also fragile. You must treat them with care, with respect for yourself and for others. Brigitte smiled uncertainly. I'll try, really. The raven nodded. That's all anyone can do, try, learn, grow. But at that moment, the sky suddenly began to tremble. The flowers faded, the trees bent toward each other. The ground beneath her feet began to ripple like water. Brigitte felt panic rising. She tried to concentrate, to hold on to the image, but her thoughts shot in all directions. The raven spread his wings. His voice now sounded anxious. Stay calm, Brigitte. Don't let yourself be swept away by fear. Focus on what you want, not on what you fear. But it was too late. The world around her imploded, colors and shapes spinning together. Everything became light and dark at the same time. Brigitte felt herself falling again, deeper than ever before, while the raven's voice echoed in her head. Keep trying, Brigitte. You can do it. You're stronger than you think. And then everything went black. Brigitte felt the world whirl beneath her and slowly sank away into darkness. The raven had suddenly disappeared, as if he had never existed, and she fell deeper and deeper, her eyes closing as her thoughts tried to focus on something familiar. She kept falling, endlessly, until her body gently touched the cold earth. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked around. She found herself once again in the darkness of the forest, where she had met the raven before. It was quiet and chilly, with only the soft rustling of leaves in the mist. In the distance, she saw a faint light flickering. It looked like the cottage of the big rabbit where she had been before. Yes, it was the same cottage, but now the surroundings were much darker and more menacing than she remembered. With a mix of hope and fear, Brigitte carefully walked toward the cottage. The wooden planks of the facade looked old and weathered, and the light in the window was weak, just a single candle flickering in the wind. She felt her heart beat faster and knocked softly on the door. There was no answer. She knocked again, a bit harder this time, but the silence remained. Suddenly, the door slowly swung open, without anyone inviting her. Brigitte hesitated for a moment, but then stepped inside. Inside, it was dim. A single candle burned in the window frame, casting long shadows over the wooden floor and the simple furniture. Otherwise, it was dark and quiet. Brigitte called softly, "Rabbit, are you here?" There was no answer, only the gentle creaking of the wood under her feet. She looked around and saw the big rabbit's clothes lying on a chair, the neat little trousers, the striped shirt, the small hat. But the rabbit himself was nowhere to be found. She walked through the small cottage, searching for clues, but everything was deserted and cold. Suddenly she heard commotion outside, low growling and rustling among the trees. Brigitte walked to the door and looked outside cautiously. There they stood in the darkness. A group of foxes, their eyes glinting like fiery stars in the night. They stood still, their ears pricked and their noses into the air as if examining her. The foxes watched her from the shadows, their red and brown fur almost invisible in the half-light. Brigitte felt a shiver run down her spine. The foxes moved slowly closer, but without aggression. They stood in a semicircle around her, their eyes full of curiosity and vigilance. She remembered what she had read about foxes, clever, adaptable animals that live in families, with sharp senses and a strong territory. She knew she had to be careful, but also that these animals might be able to help her in this strange world. In a soft voice, she said, "I am Brigitte. I am lost here and looking for my way back. I mean no harm." The foxes seemed to understand her words. One of them, slightly larger and with a slightly lighter coat, stepped forward. His eyes were bright and intelligent. He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to see right through her. Brigitte felt an unexpected calm come over her. Maybe this was the beginning of a new adventure, a new chance to learn and grow in this mysterious old world. Brigitte remained standing in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest as the foxes watched her from the darkness. Their eyes sparkled like little lanterns in the night. The group of foxes kept their distance, wary, their slender bodies half hidden among the shadows of the forest. Yet there was one fox that did not back away. His fur was deep red with a white chest and a bushy tail, and his gaze was bright and piercing. Brigitte felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She cautiously took a step forward, her hands trembling slightly. The other foxes retreated, but this one fox stood motionless, his head slightly tilted, ears pricked. Then he spoke, with a voice that was soft but clear in the night. "Are you Brigitte?" Brigitte was startled. She hadn't expected the fox to speak, let alone know her name. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the silence. The fox smiled, his sharp teeth flashing white in the dim light. "I know everything you know and more," he replied. His voice was warm, with an undertone of playfulness, but also of wisdom. The old world is a place where thoughts and dreams come together, where nothing remains hidden from those who truly look. Brigitte swallowed. "Can you help me get out of this forest? I'm lost and I want to go home." The fox looked at her for a long time, his tail swaying slowly back and forth. "Maybe. But the path home is not straight, Brigitte. It is winding and full of lessons. You are not here by accident, and you will have to understand why you are here before you can return." The other foxes remained silent, their eyes following every gesture of their leader. Brigitte felt small, but the fox's voice reassured her in a strange way. She sensed that this encounter was important, perhaps the key to her return. The fox turned and beckoned her with a slight movement of his tail. "Come, walk with me. The forest is dangerous for those who do not know it, but I will protect you as long as you are honest." Brigitte did not hesitate long and followed the fox into the darkness. The other foxes dispersed silently among the trees, like shadows dissolving in the night. Together, they walked along a narrow, winding path, the soft moss muffling their footsteps. The air was cool and moist, and it smelled of wet leaves and earth. "Why am I here?" Brigitte asked after a while. "Why can't I just wake up and be home?" The fox glanced at her over his shoulder. "Because your subconscious brought you here. You carry questions, fears, desires with you that you don't dare face in the ordinary world. The old world is a mirror, Brigitte. Everything you think, feel, and fear takes shape here." Brigitte thought of the raven, the big rabbit, her own insecurity. "So, if I learn something here, can I go back?" "Maybe," said the fox, "but only if you truly understand what you need to learn." Many dreamers wander endlessly, trapped in their own thoughts. But you have something special, Brigitte. You can listen, ask questions, grow. They walked on. The forest seemed endless, the trees reaching up like sentinels to the sky. Now and then, a sound echoed in the distance, the call of an owl, the crack of a branch. Brigitte felt safe with the fox despite the darkness. After a while, they came to a clearing where the moonlight shone through the canopy. The fox sat down and looked at her seriously. "Tell me, Brigitte, what is it you desire most?" Brigitte thought for a moment. She thought of her parents, her room in Lyon, the scent of lavender, the warmth of home. But she also thought of her insecurity, her fear of not being good enough, her desire to be understood. "I want to go home," she said softly, "but I also want to understand why I feel so lost, even when I'm at home." The fox nodded. "That is a courageous wish. Many foxes spend their whole lives searching for their place in the forest, their own den, their family. But the most important thing is that you learn to listen to yourself and to the world around you." Brigitte looked at the fox. "How do I do that? How do I listen to myself?" The fox smiled. "By being still. By feeling what lives inside you without judgment. By accepting that sometimes you are afraid, sometimes sad, sometimes angry. But also by seeing that you are brave, curious, and full of love." Brigitte felt a tear roll down her cheek. She had never seen herself like this, so honest and vulnerable. She looked at the fox and felt a deep gratitude. "Come," said the fox. "I want to show you something." They stood up and walked further, deeper into the forest. The trees parted and made way for a small clearing where an old fallen tree lay. In the trunk of the tree was a den, softly lined with leaves and moss. "This is my home," said the fox. "Here I am safe. Here I rest. Here I share my life with my family." Every fox needs a place where he can be himself, where he can let his thoughts rest. Brigitte looked at the den. It looked warm and inviting, a place of security. "May I sit here for a while?" she asked. The fox nodded. "Of course, feel welcome." Brigitte carefully crawled into the den and felt the soft moss under her hands. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the forest, the rustling of the leaves, the soft breathing of the fox beside her, the distant call of another fox in the night. "What do you hear?" asked the fox. "I hear the forest," said Brigitte, "and I hear my own heart." "That is the beginning," said the fox. "Listening to the forest, to yourself, to the world. Only then can you find your way." Brigitte opened her eyes and looked at the fox. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for helping me." The fox smiled. "You are mostly helping yourself, Brigitte. I am only a guide. You are the one who must walk the path." Slowly, Brigitte felt her fear disappear. She felt stronger, more connected to herself and to the world around her. She knew that the way home might still be long, but that she no longer needed to be afraid. Suddenly, a sound rang out in the distance, the soft yapping of a young fox, the call of family. The fox pricked up his ears and laughed softly. "My family is calling. You may stay here as long as you like, Brigitte. But when you are ready to move on, you now know where to start, with yourself." Brigitte nodded. For the first time in a long while, she no longer felt lost, but found. She knew she would find her way, step by step, listening to the forest, to her heart, and to the wise lessons of the fox. She sat for a while longer, the soft moss under her hands, the warmth of the den around her. Outside, the moonlight danced over the canopy, and in the distance, the joyful play of young foxes could be heard. Brigitte closed her eyes and smiled. She was no longer alone. Brigitte was still in the warm, soft den of the fox, her hands deep in the moss, while the moonlight fell through the canopy like silver ribbons. The fox sat next to her, his fur shining in the glow, and looked at her with a mixture of gentleness and wisdom. Suddenly, soft sounds could be heard outside the den, the patter of little paws, the cheerful yapping of young foxes. Moments later, an entire fox family emerged from the shadows of the forest. First, two young foxes came inside, their fur still fluffy and their eyes wide with curiosity. They looked at Brigitte, sniffed cautiously at her shoes, and then ran giggling around her. Then a slightly older fox entered, her fur a bit duller, her eyes kind. She nodded at Brigitte and nestled next to the big fox. "This is my family," said the fox softly. "My partner and our young. In the old world, family and community are more important than anything else. We care for each other, share what we have, and show respect for all living things." Brigitte looked in wonder at the fox family. The youngest jumped playfully over each other, while the older foxes kept a watchful eye on them. She felt welcome, as if she was part of this small community. For the first time since her arrival in the old world, she felt safe and secure. The fox's partner turned to Brigitte and spoke with a soft, warm voice. "We heard what happened. Everyone makes mistakes, Brigitte. The most important thing is that you learn from them and show respect for others, even when you are scared or hungry." Brigitte nodded, her cheeks flushing red with shame. "I should never have eaten without asking," she said softly. "I'm really sorry." The big fox smiled. "It's good that you realize that. Humility is a strength, not a weakness. Those who acknowledge their mistakes grow." Slowly, Brigitte relaxed. The fox family showed her how they worked together. The young shared the berries they found, the parents divided small prey fairly, and no one ate until everyone was ready. Brigitte watched as they groomed each other's fur, offered each other warmth, and spoke softly to each other in a language she didn't fully understand, but which touched her deeply. After a while, Brigitte felt her stomach growl. The fox noticed and stood up. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Brigitte?" he asked kindly. "We have something you'll surely like." Brigitte nodded gratefully. The fox's partner produced a small package, wrapped in leaves. She unfolded it, and inside were roasted chestnuts, berries, and a piece of freshly baked bread. Brigitte tasted it carefully, and her face lit up. It tasted delicious, warm and comforting, exactly what she needed. They ate together in silence. The foxes clearly enjoyed the food and each other's company. Brigitte felt increasingly at ease. She listened to the foxes' stories about their adventures in the forest, their search for food, and their care for one another. She learned that respect and humility were not just words, but deeds that defined life in the old world. Slowly, Brigitte became sleepy. The warmth of the den, the soft moss, and the comforting sound of the foxes made her drowsy and content. She leaned against the big fox, her eyes slowly closing. "Thank you all," she whispered, "for everything." "Rest now, Brigitte," said the fox softly. "Tomorrow is a new day." Brigitte felt herself sink into a deep, peaceful sleep. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the fox's den. She was lying in a soft chair, sunlight streaming through the window and warming her face. She looked around and recognized the cottage of the big rabbit. Everything was as she remembered. The wooden table, the little stove, the scent of fresh hay and herbs. It was daytime, and it seemed as if the darkness of the forest was far behind her. The big rabbit sat in an armchair by the window, his little hat neatly on his head, his trousers with suspenders nicely pressed. He looked at her kindly. "Good morning, Brigitte. Did you sleep well?" Brigitte stretched and nodded. "Yes, very well. But I had such a strange dream. I was in the forest with a family of foxes. They were so kind to me. We ate together and I felt safe. But before that, I was afraid. I met the raven and I was in the cottage here, but you weren't there. I didn't understand any of it." The rabbit smiled gently. "You have become acquainted with the old world, Brigitte. You have met its inhabitants, learned its lessons. The raven, the foxes, even the forest itself are all parts of this world. They are here to help you, but also to test you." Brigitte felt a slight unease rising. She looked at her hands, at the sunlight on the floor. "But I'm still not home with my parents. How is that?" What must I do to return? The big rabbit looked at her seriously. You have come further than you think, Brigitte. You have learned about respect, humility, and community. You have acknowledged your mistakes and asked for help. Those are important steps. But the journey home is not just a matter of wanting. It is a matter of growing, of trusting yourself and the process. Brigitte sighed. But what if I can't do it? What if I stay here forever? The rabbit shook his head. You are not here forever. Just as you returned to me last night, you will also find your way home. But you must have trust. Trust in your own strength and in the lessons you have learned. The old world will only let you go once you understand that you can always return, that you are always connected to it, even when you are awake. Brigitte thought about everything she had experienced: the raven, the foxes, the feeling of fear, and the feeling of coming home. She realized that this world was not just a dream, but a place where she could learn, grow, and find herself. She felt stronger, less afraid. Thank you, she said softly to the rabbit. Thank you for helping me. The rabbit nodded. It is my task to guide dreamers like you. One day you will understand that the old world is not separate from your own world. Everything you learn here, you take back with you. And who knows, maybe you'll come back again if you want to learn something new. Brigitte smiled. She felt calm, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew she was not home yet, but she also knew she was on the right path. She looked outside, where the sunlight bathed the forest in a golden glow. She felt ready for whatever would come, in this world or the next. Brigitte felt calm and light as she walked into the forest with the rabbit. The morning sun fell as golden spots through the canopy, and the moss under her feet was soft and springy. The rabbit hopped beside her, his little hat wobbling with each step and his eyes sparkling with joy. The forest was no longer scary or strange, but full of secrets that piqued her curiosity. Where are we going? Brigitte asked, running her hand along the bark of an old oak. Today, I will show you the wonders of your subconscious, replied the rabbit. Everything you experience here comes from your own thoughts, memories, and desires. This forest is a mirror of who you are, deep inside. Brigitte looked around and noticed how the environment kept changing. Where there had been a clearing, now flowers grew in colors she had never seen before. Butterflies with translucent wings flew in patterns through the air. In the distance, she heard the soft laughter of children, perhaps herself as a little girl, playing during summer vacation. She felt safe and secure, as if the forest embraced her. The rabbit stopped now and then to show her something. A brook in which her own reflection appeared and disappeared, a tree where her name was carved next to that of her best friend, a place where the scent of her mother's perfume lingered. See, said the rabbit, everything you love lives on here, but also your fears, your doubts, your dreams and hopes. Brigitte thought of the raven, the foxes, the feeling of loneliness and the longing for home. She now understood that these were all parts of herself, pieces of her soul she needed to get to know and accept. After a while, they came to a narrow path, winding like a silver ribbon between the trees. The rabbit stopped and looked at her seriously. You must walk this path alone, Brigitte. I cannot go any further with you. Brigitte felt a pang of sadness. Why not? Come with me. I feel safe with you. The rabbit smiled softly. You have seen and learned everything I can teach you at this moment. There is one more lesson you must learn, Brigitte: how to manifest. That is the key to happiness and trust in the process. Brigitte looked at the path, which faded into the light in the distance. She understood what the rabbit meant. All right, I will walk the path, she said, her voice determined but soft. You are brave and confident. Everything will be all right, said the rabbit. He bowed his head, tipped his hat, and then slowly disappeared among the trees until Brigitte could no longer see him. She stood still for a moment, feeling the silence and emptiness left by the rabbit's departure. But in that silence, a sense of strength grew. She knew she could do this. Taking a deep breath, Brigitte took her first steps onto the path. She felt the soft moss under her feet, heard the birds singing and the wind rustling in the leaves. The path led her deeper into the forest until she came to a wide river. The water flowed quickly, foaming over the stones, and somewhere further on she heard the thunderous roar of a waterfall. Brigitte stood on the bank, looked at the swirling water, and felt her heart beat faster. She knew she had to show trust in the process here, that she had to learn to let go and overcome her fear. She thought of everything she had learned: respect, humility, listening to her heart and her dreams. She looked up at the blue sky and whispered, "I trust myself. I trust the process." Without thinking further, Brigitte jumped into the river. The cold water closed around her, tugged at her clothes and hair. She was swept along by the current, felt how the water carried her toward the roar of the waterfall. But this time she was not afraid. She knew she had to let go, surrender to the flow. The water carried her, faster and faster, until she slid over the edge of the waterfall. She felt weightless, floating in the air. And then she fell, but not with fear, but with trust. She knew everything would be all right. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in her own bed. The morning light fell through the window. Her familiar room was around her. She saw her stuffed animals on the shelf, her school bag on the chair, the posters on the wall. She heard the soft clatter of her parents in the kitchen, the sound of plates and cutlery, the familiar morning ritual. Brigitte lay still for a moment, her heart beating calmly and her mind feeling clear. She knew she was home, truly home. She thought of everything she had experienced: the rabbit, the raven, the foxes, the forest, and the river. She felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. She got up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The sun shone over the rooftops of Lyon, the city slowly awakening. She heard her parents' voices, smelled the scent of fresh bread and coffee. Everything was as it should be, but Brigitte knew she had changed. She walked to the kitchen where her parents were busy preparing breakfast. Her mother looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Did you sleep well?" Brigitte nodded and laughed. "Yes, very well. I dreamed about a magical forest, a rabbit with a little hat, foxes, and a raven. And I learned that I can trust myself." Her father looked at her in surprise. "That sounds like a special adventure." Brigitte nodded. "It was, and I'm glad to be home again." She sat down at the table, took a bite of her sandwich, and felt stronger than ever. She knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but now she also knew that she could always trust in her own strength, her dreams, and her ability to manifest what she needed. The day began like any other, but for Brigitte, everything felt new. She was home, but she knew that the old world would always remain within her, as a source of wisdom, strength, and confidence. And deep inside, she knew, if she ever got lost again, she would find her way back. Because she had learned to trust the process, to let go, and to follow her own path wherever it might lead.